Famine isn't just about drought, it's about politics, and it's always the civilians who pay the price. Hello, welcome to my journalism toolkit. This is the story of the famine in Somalia in 2011, a famine that killed hundreds of thousands of Somalis. I was there. I made several trips over a period of weeks. I knew the situation was bad, but after the UN officially declared a famine, it dominated international headlines. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm Jamal Osman. This is my weekly podcast where I take you behind the scenes of some of my biggest stories. My first stop was Nairobi, because that's where all the NGOs operating in Somalia are based. For security reasons, they work out of Kenya's capital. That's also where you get the first look at the politics of aid. Reports were coming that thousands of people were arriving daily at the Dab, a refugee camp in northern Kenya. So I made the decision that I would head to Doble, the border town between Kenya and Somalia, to meet people fleeing to the Dab. The first thing I noticed was the numbers weren't adding up. The figures NGOs were releasing didn't match what I was seeing on the ground. I had good contacts, NGO workers, local Somalis. When I asked them why, they told me the numbers were being exaggerated for political reasons. That's when I was reminded famine is always about politics. Civilians are caught in the middle, but famine is never just a natural disaster. In Somalia, the situation was worsened by an argument over access. The relationship between Western NGOs and Al-Shabaab has always been adversarial. NGOs accused Al-Shabaab of extortion and intimidation. Many had been kicked out. On the other hand, Al-Shabaab saw these organizations as spies, as tools of the West. There was no trust, no cooperation. Meanwhile, the US, the biggest donor, was instructing NGOs not to distribute food aid in Al-Shabaab-controlled areas. And those areas were the epicenter of the famine. Officially, the US said it was to prevent Al-Shabaab from profiting from food aid. But there was another reason, one that wasn't popular at the time. The US saw the famine as an opportunity to weaken and ultimately defeat Al-Shabaab. The idea goes like this: if locals are starved, they will turn against Al-Shabaab. And credible sources within the humanitarian community in Nairobi told me that the US was deliberately starving Somalis to defeat Al-Shabaab. You could argue that's immoral, but that's politics. From Doble, I returned to Nairobi, edited the story overnight, and flew to Mogadishu. My objective was to travel to the epicenter of the famine to see it for myself. And that was going to Baidabo and K50, all under the control of Al-Shabaab. To get in, I had to go through Al-Shabaab's office in Mogadishu. Back then, their communication team was based in the capital. You tell them where you wanted to go, what you wanted to film. If they approve, you go. They don't interfere beyond that. I got permission and we drove to Baidabo, 240 kilometers from Mogadishu. There, in an old presidential palace turned IDP camp, I saw the suffering firsthand, families displaced, children starving. And then a young health worker approached me. "You need to see the hospital," he said. "What you will see there, it's shocking." I walked into the hospital and the scale of the crisis became painfully clear. Malnourished children everywhere. 6 rooms full of desperate mothers trying to keep their children alive. Some children were being cared for by their older siblings who were just children themselves, while their parents searched for food. The lead doctor told me 4, 5, 6 children were dying every single day.
Some die of diarrhea, others lack of food.
I had to be sensitive. These weren't just numbers, these were people, human beings. I never just turned on my camera. I walked in first to introduce myself, explained why I was there, asked permission, and almost always they said yes. From Baidabo, we drove to Marca to film the WFP warehouse. Then I interviewed Al-Shabaab's spokesperson, Sheikh Ali Dere. I asked all the important and relevant questions, some of them tough, and he answered all of them.
There is a drought, but it's not reached a famine. The famine has been averted due to support and aid from business and Somali communities.
Then we went to K50, which is 50 kilometers from Mogadishu. Displaced people were arriving daily. But here is what was different. Al-Shabaab did not want permanent IDP camps. Instead, they registered people, gave them food aid, and encouraged them to return home. They argued that camps create dependency, disease, and security risks. Some families refused. Others saw it as a way to survive, return to their farms, wait for the raid, and rebuild their lives. A story like this is pure politics. Al-Shabaab, seen as a terrorist group by the West, was blamed for the famine. Western governments were trying to defeat them by any means. Civilians were just collateral damage. Food was a weapon. At the time, some of my reportings angered both Western governments and Al-Shabaab. But as a journalist, you report the truth, you verify, and when you know the facts, you don't back down. It's easy to fall into the propaganda trap, to tell the story one side wants you to tell. But in the end, the truth stands. And in the story of Somalia's famine in 2011, that truth was clear. Famine isn't just about drought, it's about politics, and it's always the civilians who pay the price. If you enjoyed this episode, join me on Substack. This is my journalism toolkit. See you next time. Thank you for watching.